Boom, 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 boom.
Bam, 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 bam.
My dear friends, it's happened. 200 edition of Kanga No Comment. Who would have thought? For us, this is a big topic, a big deal, which is why, exceptionally, we have very important guests today. Tomek Widanka.
Hi.
That's right. Łukasz and Sławek. Today's episode is a journalistic one. We are talking about how the crypto world will change, how the crypto world has changed, and not just the crypto world, but also the world of technology. Tomek, do you remember 100 weeks ago when we last hosted No Comment together, what that time frame was? You don't remember, so I'm coming to your rescue now. We recorded the 100th episode of No Comment in September 2024, and for the next 100, that is the 300th episode. It will be July 2028. I calculated all that very quickly. And today I would like to talk with you about how the world of technology and the world of crypto have changed over the last 100 weeks, and what the world of technology, crypto, and our lives in general will look like in another 100 weeks. And I'm starting with a question that I actually sent you this morning so you could prepare, but I assume that in the rush of your duties, you probably didn't read it because you, Tomek, for those who don't know, are a programmer. Will you have to retrain as an NBA player within the next 100 weeks because the profession of a programmer will cease to exist? And I am directing this question to you, to Łukasz, to Kamil, and in general, how will reality change within these next 100 weeks?
I'll tell you, we were joking with the guys that we're going to start a finishing construction business. But honestly, I really do think that when it comes to the practical application of AI, a skilled engineer is still absolutely needed. We are currently just playing around with these AI tools, trying them out and rigorously testing them. And I have to say, it is really not as rosy or as perfect as those AI salespeople often tell people in the business world. That is at least my own personal opinion based on what I have seen so far. However, when it comes to the entire crypto market, the impact of AI is definitely gigantic.
I'm asking this not even in the context of the crypto market right now. You dear viewers can't see this, but there are a lot of people sitting behind the camera in our special room, and I see someone who knows my accounting. I see people who work in the office. I see people from marketing. I see all sorts of different people. And I wonder if when we meet, some of the professions represented here in this room or represented by the people watching us will simply cease to exist. Because let me tell you, I am convinced now, Łukasz, maybe something in your own words, this isn't what we thought. Please confirm if that's what you thought. If I had asked you in the 100th episode whether you think AI can effectively replace programmers in the near future, would you have said, yes, I agree? Or would you have said that for many, many, many years to come, AI really won't surprise us the way it is actually surprising us now? It surprised us. In general, when you ask someone about the future of AI, everyone always answers the same way. They often say, yes, AI is going to fundamentally change our lives, and it will inevitably cause a lot of people to lose their jobs and so on. But deep down, most people think that doesn't really apply to them. They believe their job is special, that no one else will ever be able to do it quite like they do. I would argue that if you were to ask almost anyone about this, they would all answer in exactly the same way. Because the honest truth is, I used to firmly believe that AI would by no means ever replace a programmer. But looking at the landscape right now, I have to admit, yes, it will replace them, just as it is currently replacing many other people in various fields. However, I would also argue that the profession of a programmer will not simply disappear. Instead, it will just be doing something a bit different as they take on entirely new and different tasks. Just as you could look back through history and say that whenever there was significant technological progress, for example, when the mechanical loom was first created or when other early industrial machines were introduced, they inevitably caused certain traditional professions to disappear completely, fundamentally reshaping the way people worked and lived their daily lives. Or became marginal, for example. There are relatively few carriage drivers left, but a whole host of new professions appeared that filled. That is what opponents of AI development are saying today, because this movement is intensifying more and more. They actually say the carriage driver, the person who sat on the carriage, this profession ceased to exist, but he could retrain as a car driver. And here we have the challenge that 10 to 50 accountants, marketers, financial analysts, programmers will be able to be replaced by one person who simply collaborates with AI. And that is the fundamental difference. That is how it will be. I believe that is how it will be. So productivity will increase. And in fact, those people who, I think that in general, when it comes to programmers, a whole lot of programmers are acting like monkeys. They are simply acting like monkeys. I'm not talking about our programmers, I'm talking generally. There is a whole mass of programmers who churn out code that has already been written 10,000 times. And they churn it out somewhat unnecessarily because it could have been copied.
It's just that the modifications needed to adapt it to our current needs make it much easier to simply write it from scratch. And as a result, those original programmers will eventually disappear. Just like copywriters have disappeared, I don't know if it's clearly visible on the market yet. Copywriters in that mass who were supposed to create texts and generate some new articles based on others, they were actually just rewriting without adding anything of their own, or very little. That profession has disappeared because AI does it perfectly. Maybe it doesn't do it perfectly yet, but it does it well enough that it suits us, and it does it 1,000 times faster. It will be the same with programmers. Those code monkeys, I think programmers will have a different scope of competencies and different responsibilities. The situation where we have in many large software houses a team of programmers doing exactly what they were told to do will cease to exist. We have a precise order. It describes creating such and such a function that does this and that, this, that, and the other. It is described exactly. Such a person will disappear because AI will write such a function. However, the role of a skilled programmer who has to figure out exactly how something should work will continue to exist for a long time to come. This is because quite often it is absolutely necessary to combine certain complex things that have never existed before in history, or to understand a context broad enough that current AI systems are simply unable to grasp or fully comprehend. Why is it that now, when we write something that an AI person would write, stupid code often gets created? Because what we write doesn't completely describe what we actually want. Since AI doesn't guess, it doesn't know the context deeply enough. However, in the case of humans, when we talk to each other, we say something. We have this unspoken context, certain unspoken assumptions. And additionally, we also have to come up with something that an AI won't foresee. I was writing something like that myself recently, experimenting, and what the AI came up with at the beginning was correct, in the sense that it did what I wrote, but it wasn't useful to me at all because it didn't fit the context I was in. And when I started adding that context, instead of changing the approach completely, for example, it just expanded on what was already there. Of course, you'll say now that if I had pasted that whole description from scratch, I probably would have had a better result, but I think that's where the main problem with defining all of this will be, and that might be the programmer's profession.
I would add something else, but now I would like to ask Camille, because I know that Camille is a very early enthusiast of artificial intelligence.
From my perspective, this needs to be divided into two things: how we perceive artificial intelligence now and how it will look in 2 years.
Exactly, because
I think that at this stage, if we look at what was happening 2 years ago with artificial intelligence, what level that artificial intelligence had then compared to what it is now, it is exponential growth. And I think this exponential growth will continue. And in 2 years, 4 years, by 2030 at the latest, I think there will already be a super intelligence that will surpass us all in terms of any competencies we have. So I think that at that stage, it's hard to predict what the world will look like. Even at this moment, as factories are being built that will produce humanoid robots, which will do some things for us, which will be directed by AI, well, that could already be a completely different reality that we will be in. At this moment, it's the case that, as you said, Łukasz, a large number of roles that people perform are disappearing right now. But I think that while I used to be a very strong pessimist, thinking that it would just wipe everything out, I think that at this moment the market will become very professionalized for people who have some experience. For example, I will speak from a marketing perspective, for example. content creation and creating, for example, graphics. Well, these people will specialize in being AI supervisors. I operate on the assumption that a person who has graphic design experience, creates graphics, and has been a graphic designer for years, will definitely create a better graphic using AI than someone who has no idea about graphic design. These people will specialize more, and the number of people on the market who operate in the field of graphics and content will decrease. But the content will definitely be generated by AI, but this supervisory role will grow.
But there will be 100 times fewer of these supervisory roles.
Right? Exactly.
How many? 100
times fewer, 100
times fewer.
And those people who are at these lower levels of like involvement in graphics and content, they will disappear, definitely, right?
But the people, I hope, won't disappear.
No, the people won't. And now I think that exactly what I said, referring back to what I said earlier, that in a few years we will have this super intelligence. Well, then I think those supervisory roles will also slowly start to fade out, although maybe not for content, because when a human reads something human, it comes easier. Well, at this moment, we can already see posts on Facebook or X that are generated by AI, and it's very easy to spot. You just read it, and after 5 or 10 paragraphs, you already know it's generated text, that it wasn't written by a human, for now.
And
right.
Too well.
So
it doesn't sound human.
And now we're also running into problems related to the whole AI content generation, because at this point there is so much AI generated content appearing on the internet that AI is feeding on this content and falling into a loop of hallucinations or a loop of stupidity, which is being described. I don't know if you've heard, but there's a situation now where, God, I won't say which company it is that deals with AI, but they are buying up books heavily.
They cut off the spines of the books and have the content scanned for AI directly from the books. They are buying these books en masse from secondhand bookstores all over the world. They destroy them afterwards, which is also a loss, of course, but they are training AI not based on what is on the internet, but based on content that was printed and was real. These contents will disappear
very soon.
And I think we will soon have a problem where everything will be generated by AI at some later stage. There will be very few roles left that will physically create something, but on the other hand, I think it won't disappear. Because just like we have mechanical watches, we introduced electronic watches, mechanical watches didn't disappear. We have cars, which didn't replace horse-drawn carriages. There are just a few less of those carriages. Similarly, we have electric cars, which have pushed out combustion engines, but those combustion engines will still remain in some narrower group. And I think that is some kind of future for us, that those things which will be really made by people, handmade, they will have much greater value than how it looks at this moment.
Think about all those musicians who, back in the days before recording technology became widespread, meaning, of course, before the very first records were ever made and you could simply play music without needing a live band present, used to perform in cafes and small venues very often. It was a completely different era where if you wanted to hear a melody, you had to be there in person to experience the magic of live music. And suddenly you could say, literally from 1 week to the next, they stopped playing because a recording of music appeared, which meant you could plug in a record, turn it on, and you didn't have to pay a band, and thousands of musicians suddenly lost their jobs. And the question is, what will these people do now? The question is, will they have anything to do? One of the theses says that they won't have anything to do.
I'll want to talk to you about this in a moment.
A short crisis may be ahead.
This is exactly the question, 3 short. And now Tomek will slowly have a question, and it will be a question regarding your children. But before I ask it, I'll just tell you about a story by Zajdel, Janusz Zajdel, of whom I am a big fan, as some of you probably know. In one of his stories, he said that just as some mass gains more and more speed as it approaches the speed of light, the energy we have to put in to accelerate it even further is so great that it is said to grow to infinity. In one of his stories, he described a phenomenon where the lifespan of knowledge or a skill is shortening, in the sense that if I acquire some knowledge, some skill, it used to be enough for my whole life. I could even teach my children, and they could teach their own children. Well, but now it might soon be the case that if I wake up in the morning and learn something, by the evening that skill will be useless to anyone. And this time in that story is shortening, and Zajdel says that if we reach a point where the knowledge we've just acquired is obsolete in a minute, that will be the end of the world. That's how he defined it. Tomek, a question for you. As a programmer, do you encourage your children to become programmers, or do you advise against it? Or let me ask the question a bit differently, and this will also be a question I'd like us to discuss. What competence should our children or we ourselves really be acquiring today so that we can still survive in a few years, so that it doesn't turn out that what we've learned now will simply be useless to anyone tomorrow?
I would perhaps step away from that question. From my own personal perspective, it really looks like this. If we continue to cut back on essential human competencies to such a significant degree, and artificial intelligence takes over so many critical things in this particular theory, I have to wonder, won't the entire structure of our society eventually collapse at some point? It is a deeply concerning question that we really need to consider carefully. Or will future generations, looking back at our current trajectory, eventually be able to, as it were, sustain and maintain this specific influx of competencies that have become so incredibly narrowed down around those particular groups you were just talking about earlier? So, coming back to the question for me regarding my children, fortunately, they are still very young, so they don't think about their future professional life, but because they see how much dad sits in front of the computer and is a programmer, I suspect that my son might have flashes of wanting to be a programmer, but I suspect he would still prefer to be a soccer player. So,
Not a firefighter?
no.
That's
Not that stage. Right now it's kicking a ball. So when it comes to that, I don't know what my children will do. I'm not pushing them to become programmers. However, I will certainly try to help them in the future to adapt to the reality that will be prevailing then. Because as you say, the world is accelerating, the world is changing. And what we will do in the future and how we will do it will require, I think, parents can have a big influence on that and on our children, meaning our contribution to the development of our children.
What are you teaching your children? When you think about their future, what specific skill would you most like to see them learn and master? And looking at the bigger picture, what is the one thing that you truly care about the most for them? Think about that.
And I have an answer.
Exactly.
I believe that one of the fundamental things that should be instilled is curiosity. Curiosity about what is happening, curiosity about learning, the desire to learn about what is, because that will ensure they don't get stuck in something that is already, for example, unnecessary. Because just as I think that a profession like, for example, the cashier, which might seem like it would disappear, it won't actually disappear. It's very possible that it will only be in exclusive stores, or a waiter, well, a chef is probably the least threatened profession.
However, though,
Here, I really think you just need to maintain that constant sense of vigilance and a genuine desire to learn something new, because that is the best way to ensure you do not end up in a bad situation. However, I will also mention Zajdel.
I wanted to focus on a thing. Walter Isaacson, that is the man who wrote many different interesting biographies. When he was writing the biography of Leonardo da Vinci, later he summarizes what was his greatest competence, his greatest skill: curiosity.
Aha, well, okay, fine. I didn't know that. No, I didn't know. However, the vision of such social changes that could occur is terrifying to me, which is also described, again, we'll say, by Seidel, probably Kanga's favorite writer. That's how it looks in Leib's Inferior. He presents, I'll spoil it a bit, but only a little, he presents a society that is actually divided into people who think they are doing something, who think they are needed for something, who have jobs, but only so they don't sit around and stagnate, just so they have some occupation and have their ambitions, desires, and so on. And a second society which actually does real work, only there is so little of this necessary work that it's not enough for everyone, and one has to invent something. Although that's a bit inconsistent with the biblical model, because it is written there that if someone does not want to work, let them not eat.
That is what is written. Because if someone doesn't want to and someone else wants to, but there is no work,
then
what about such people?
that
is the challenge. That is also exactly the question that I ask myself more and more often. For example, as a person who is so extremely free market oriented, and I have always believed and still believe, although doubts are already appearing, that the free market will always regulate itself. And yet in situations where technology is developing faster and faster, because that is exactly it, that these next 2 years, its development will be faster than over the last 2 years, that we can rather assume. And the next 2 years after that will be many times faster. And we simply won't be able to keep up with learning.
The question is whether you are calculating that correctly, because it is just as you said, as we approach that speed of light, we slow down significantly, and the level of energy we need to expend to get there is gigantic and ever increasing. So we don't know where the ceiling is, and we don't know if that ceiling isn't already very close, because none of us sits inside that company producing the models and truly knows what's under the hood. Yes.
like that one company that was operating, I think a year ago, a company that had a super extra artificial intelligence programming model that worked really well. It wasn't incredibly fast, but it was effective. And it turned out that in reality, there were 10,000 Indians sitting there and typing out the code. That kind of situation. That reminds me, speaking of interesting marketing, look at Camil, because one of the most successful campaigns by a company, a job placement agency, but not a state-run one, rather a commercial one, they plastered various places with very suggestive stickers, constructed in such a way that, for example, when we looked at the ATM from the side, the sticker showed the inside of the ATM as if that there was a person sitting inside taking the money or dispensing the money. There were a lot of machines like that at some vending machine selling sweets. It was also like there's a guy sitting in there who's actually handing things out, taking the money and turning cranks. And it was written, "Are you bored with your job?" It really is quite a fascinating marketing idea. However, artificial intelligence is actually having a much bigger impact on our daily reality than I ever initially expected. I can honestly say that I didn't think it would be this much. Although on the other hand, as I get used to it, I start thinking about it in a way. We even said at a recent IT meeting that artificial intelligence produces code in the same way. This will be for the nerds now, as a compiler produces machine code. A programmer used to write in machine code, then a compiler was created, and you could use a more abstract language, not such an extreme one. And this abstract language was converted into machine code. And now we have a situation where we have another compiler for an even higher language, a higher level of abstraction, which is our own speech. And this compiler creates a program that is compiled into machine code. So in total, nothing has changed. A programmer is still needed only.
That is exactly right. And I completely agree with that point.
I am very curious if that is how
it will begin,
or if that is how it will end.
We will move on to crypto topics in a moment. I'm saying this for those who are watching us because they would like to learn about crypto. But crypto today in Poland, as we discuss it, is inextricably linked to regulatory topics, which is boring as hell. So I would still like to talk about these regulations, but in the context of technology as such. Do you think, and this really does correspond quite closely to your earlier statement about the state of society, that someone, perhaps a governing body, will eventually have to make the difficult decision to introduce strong binding regulations that will actively limit development in order for our societies to survive in the long run?
AI development in
technology as such. AI, of course, in the first place.
I strongly believe it is essentially unstoppable in any meaningful or practical respect, because right now the major centers of power around the world, so to speak, the leading Asian, American and European centers, are all actively competing with one another across the field of artificial intelligence, and that competition continues to drive the technology forward.
Europe clearly wants to lose
the race. That was a bad example, but the American and Asian ones are definitely competing with each other. And now, whichever of these sides tries to slow down its development of AI, at some point will let the other side get ahead. And there's no chance here, I think, to stop it in any way.
But look, Countries have agreed before all over the world, almost all over the world, because now we have a conflict that, e.g., we won't develop atomic technologies everywhere when it comes to building, e.g., hydrogen or atomic bombs, right?
Yes, but here, if you want to make a bomb, you need a lot of resources to create a bomb.
But what I mean is that they agreed, almost everyone all over the world, I say almost in the context of Iran, that there are designated countries that can hold some amount of atomic warheads, but in general, we do not agree to its spreading.
The effect of this is exactly as if we said we want to introduce mandatory disarmament. We are eliminating all guns entirely. Let's assume we limit ourselves, that only one gun exists. Notice that the person who keeps that gun will rule over everyone else.
Exactly, that's what we want to say.
And it will be the same here. We can ban AI, and it is very possible that AI will be banned, universally banned, except for 1, 2, or 3 centers that will continue to develop this AI. And those who will be developing this AI will have an infinite advantage over everyone else. Just like nuclear powers currently have an advantage over all other countries. It's a bit
different case with the atomic bomb, because the atomic bomb didn't give advantages to people. The state had an advantage because it had nuclear weapons and could exert influence on another country, but AI helps everyone. At this point, it would be difficult for some people not to use AI. If it helps everyone, then the amount of positives resulting from using AI is much greater than the imaginary threat that might appear at a later time.
But reversing the logic, imagine all those people who are losing their jobs and have nothing to do. Because just as we have some professions that seem unnecessary, and you could say are only there so that people have something to occupy themselves with, and suddenly all those people, those billions of people, have nothing to occupy themselves with. So what will they do?
You have to generate artificial work for them.
There's a problem.
Exactly. So jobs will continue to be performed and created, ensuring that these people have something meaningful to occupy themselves with throughout their day. This will help them stay engaged, providing a sense of purpose and structure in their daily lives. So they don't go out into the streets and start.
You can do something else. You can provide a guaranteed income. And that's what's being talked about right now, not to give work that won't be needed by anyone.
That test didn't work because there was this movie, I can't recall the title right now, but there was an interview in one of those Persian Gulf countries. A citizen of this country finished his studies, very decent studies, probably in the States, returned to his country and got a job. And after 5 years, he realized that he wasn't doing anything. Nothing. It doesn't matter. He was given some tasks and he performed them, but at some point he stopped doing them. I mean, he started doing random things and would just sit at work and watch movies. And he had a real job, an educated, well-trained man, intelligent, and he started having a problem with the fact that he knew his work was unnecessary. And in that movie, if anyone knows this movie, please write to me, because I would like to watch it again. I watched it about 4 years ago, or 3. I would like to see it again. And he talks there about what a terrible torment it was for him. How
guaranteed income sort of solves this issue. Well,
no, because you don't have an occupation.
You can then pursue hobbies.
You can
make pottery, create music. Yes.
That's what everyone who currently has a job thinks, and it's just like people who dream of retiring and then they go into retirement, have nothing to do, and one day they wake up and start inventing artificial activities for themselves. One person has an allotment garden and weeds the beds there, while another becomes the neighborhood sheriff and watches what's happening in the neighborhood. But people need occupation, they need work, they need challenges, they need some purpose for their existence. Here,
I agree, but notice that even Elon Musk, who you can say is a supporter of a leftist approach and handing out money, but rather believes that work is important, well, even he says that this guaranteed income will be introduced at a later stage, that it is inevitable. So many people will be left in the world. We are constantly looking at this Western part of the world. I often go back in my memories to when I was in Asia, and we are constantly focusing on this Western part, which is really a big place to be replaced by AI and a big one for humanoid robots. But when we look at Southeast Asia, there is simply those people who are at that low standard of living, who are salespeople or cleaners. There is a multitude of them there. And that is impossible to replace for the next 10 years for sure.
Why?
There isn't enough capital there to introduce humanoid robots. And besides, the infrastructure is not like ours. There is no electricity in some regions there. It is difficult to get to some areas. These cities or countries or islands in general are not that well connected. And this development of AI or the impact of AI on environments in those countries, for example, in Sumatra, I don't see any possibility at all for introducing AI there anywhere.
And
those people will continue to live their own lives, and we in the Western world will de facto be far ahead of them in terms of civilization. The question is,
whether ahead,
I mean, exactly whether.
it won't be the case that actually.
Exactly, yes. And besides, you know, Elon Musk also said that the time of universal abundance is coming, that everyone will have everything, everyone will be able to afford everything, and well, what happens to society then exactly?
We have now officially moved into some very deep and complex journalistic territory, which is a subject that requires our full attention.
That's the nature of this program. But changing the subject, during the 100th episode of No Comment, Bitcoin cost $54,000, and today it costs 60 something. 60? 60.
4.
We haven't jumped up that much. In the meantime, the chronicler's duty calls here. It cost 126,000. Is Bitcoin's time coming to an end? Another bold thesis. And will Bitcoin still allow for profit?
In my opinion, yes. I honestly think that when you look at it as a fundamental concept of money and a reliable settlement system between people, it is still, in my view, a concept that is certainly not devoid of any real value. It really does hold its own.
It is said that Satoshi Nakamoto was wrong about this in general, because when he wrote the manifesto, he wrote that Bitcoin was supposed to be money, and none of us would actually want to pay with our Bitcoin. That is his great mistake.
Or perhaps we have been using it the wrong way all along.
It
was actually wrong.
Now it is a speculative tool. Just look. These drops over the year, not even a year. From October until now, we have already fallen by 50% even a few months ago. Until this level stabilizes, and this fluctuation is not so dramatic, there will continue to be a speculative part here. Some claim that because Bitcoin is, as you said, a speculative tool, but still increasingly popular, thanks to this, you can still earn something there. Once stabilization is reached, once big institutions are fully positioned in Bitcoin, it will stop being attractive.
But do you think they won't be playing with it then? That they won't be causing these drops and rises to induce panic in people?
There won't be 30% increases. The question is, what would the value of Bitcoin have to be for it to reach that level? It depends on who you ask. Some say that the threshold value is 10 million, that if Bitcoin were to cost 10 million, in today's terms, of course, then that would be the level of stabilization. A typical logarithmic chart, at the beginning, the price grew little, then an inflection point, a very rapid growth, maintenance, and reaching a certain threshold value. Some say 10 million, others say 100. So there are some minor differences as to how much Bitcoin must cost to start being stable. And then it will stop being a speculative tool. So when it reaches those 10 million, let's stick to that lower limit, meaning it has to increase about 100 times, well, then it will stop being a speculative tool because it won't be so.
It is quite volatile.
I think that here capital dispersion also needs to enter
even greater.
Because someone like Saylor and his purchases, well, you know, sales.
You meant to say he can always
at any moment drive the price down. I think the same goes for BlackRock and its growing crises later on.
I might jump into the conversation because I would go back to what we were talking about a moment ago. You were talking about guaranteed income.
If
everyone has a guaranteed income because AI takes everyone's jobs, everyone is somehow living, then nobody is simply investing in something like Bitcoin. The value of Bitcoin, in my opinion, will be built through crises. If we have an economy, e.g., the United States, we have boom, and boom won't work out. And circular financial dependencies in the United States between Nvidia, Microsoft, and other tech giants, which pass created values back and forth among themselves, and it goes like ping pong, billions of dollars. They invested $500 billion right here, and those who received $50 billion from it simply invested it right back into them. The financial bubble is just continuing to swell and grow larger every single day. But when it all eventually crashes down, Bitcoin will remain standing. And then we will be moving at the level of $10 million per single Bitcoin.
Why not gold? Why do you think people will go for Bitcoin and not gold?
And where is that gold?
You can't touch gold, right? Actually, when you
buy a lot
of paper gold.
Yes, everyone has gold. Everyone is investing in gold. They go to a broker, they buy themselves some gold. And what did they actually buy? Paper. Paper based on a financial system that is called gold. And there are, of course, people who will buy that coin, that bar, and physically bury it somewhere in their garden. Just imagine that this bar is suddenly worth $10 billion and you have it in your garden. Who will buy it from you? Where will you sell it? It's problematic, it's indivisible, it's inconvenient.
I understand. I truly do understand. And I wouldn't want this to come across the wrong way. You don't have to convince me, but I'm still going to dig a little deeper here or pester you about it. Because when we look at the data, we see that even in crisis situations, people still instinctively go out and buy gold.
But what kind of people? We are talking about generations when we talk about crisis situations. The experience we have might be, for example, war. What did people do when the war broke out? They took what they could. Why did they take gold? Because that gold was all they had, because they didn't have those bitcoins yet. Only now are we starting to enter the moment when everyone is beginning to think, okay, we have something other than gold. Someone who is actively hedging their portfolio and buying gold, I am absolutely convinced, has this specific thought running through their head. Okay, gold is very good. It's a solid store of value, right? Diamonds, well, they are not so much in favor anymore, perhaps a little less desirable than they once were. But people used to say maybe we should include a little bit of these bitcoins too, at least a small portion, just to be safe, right? And that is exactly how the investment strategy will take shape over time as market habits and investor perspectives inevitably change. It certainly takes time, though admittedly much less time than it did before, simply because the world around us is rushing forward at such a breakneck pace, meaning changes are happening faster than ever. But despite all that, I honestly believe that having some crypto tucked away gives me a truly profound and lasting sense of security. Even if I'm not thinking about selling, it is precisely my hedge. And even if a war breaks out or anything sudden like that happens, I will still have those bitcoins. I don't have to worry about whether I can withdraw from the bank or not. Something Bitcoin sounds like I have thousands, but no. However, it's always something.
We know you have more than one.
More than one, yes.
Besides, there is transferring abroad, moving capital or money abroad in general. If you have at this moment, just like Łukasz said, if there were a war, man, and someone has 5 kilos of gold here.
I need 60 seconds to say something and also to go back a bit to the previous conversation. One of the big problems that is being pointed out right now, and also as a flaw of the free market, is that today a limited group of people is getting rich off the technological revolution, that someone like Elon Musk is getting richer and richer and richer, and we actually see that the world's GDP is growing. But in reality, that doesn't mean at all that the GDP or the value of the average person's portfolio is growing. And
that is
true, because now I really want to move on to what I originally wanted to say. Everyone constantly brings up this specific war scenario, arguing that once a major conflict breaks out, it is actually much easier to put a ledger in your pocket than to carry around a heavy gold bar. And later on, you will find it incredibly hard to pay for basic necessities like flour or a loaf of bread with that gold bar. About where the price of gold, the price of Bitcoin, etc. comes from. Today, it is not decided by those people who will be fleeing during the war. It is not individuals who decide, but large institutions. And they somehow don't want to be convinced about Bitcoin.
I think it is wandering capital.
Notice that all our cryptocurrency arguments are based on the idea that the average ordinary person will become increasingly convinced, and I'll repeat it again, during this mythical, maybe I shouldn't say it like that, I said mythical war. War, as it turns out, is not mythical at all, but mythical because everyone keeps referring to war, right? Well, no, it's institutions that hold the capital. A limited group of people are actually the richest in the world, and they are the ones dealing the cards. Yeah.
Yes, but just as Satoshi created it, he didn't create it for those capitalists. He didn't create it for those institutions. The fact that they entered the Bitcoin market and the cryptocurrency market is a derivative of what they are created for. They are created to generate profit.
And they saw potential there. That's why they got into it. However, they don't care about Bitcoin. They don't care about its value. They care about the turnover and clipping coupons from that turnover, not about the value of the asset itself.
So in reality, we are only on the eve of the revolution associated with Bitcoin. It is precisely at the moment when Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies start being used by ordinary people that the revolution will happen. Because first we had the enthusiasts, now we have, let's call it the era of institutions, which are doing this not so that everything around them is better, but so that they can grab or earn, because that's how they are constructed. and only in the next step might people enter. And when people enter, and this Bitcoin actually becomes common in use, well, it may turn out that Bitcoin is truly better than gold. It doesn't just may turn out. It is better than gold, but just being better doesn't give you anything. Betamax was better than VHS anyway, and VHS won.
If anyone doesn't know why VHS won, let them check Wikipedia, because we're embarrassed to talk about such things here. If you were to point out what has changed in the crypto world over these last 100 weeks, it's hard because we don't fully know what events took place, but I'll remind you, because I gave the Bitcoin price, we know there was a jump to 126. From that 50 now we have almost 70, right?
64?
Almost. But there was one more thing. Mikia was only just approaching. It was already September 2024. We know that across all of Europe, Mikia started operating as an active regulation at the end of 2024. What has definitely changed is that our environment is becoming increasingly regulated, or I would even say over-regulated. And that is the one thing that has changed significantly over these 100 weeks. Is there anything else that catches your eye?
Well, what catches my eye, for example, is the situation with Solana, meme coins, Trump coin, and the lack of loss of trust in the cryptocurrency market simply because of that. I believe
that this is a huge scam. Scams.
Trump coins, Melania coins.
Javiera Millet.
All this infrastructure that was built on Solana sucked retail money out of the market because a lot of people jumped on these 10x, 20x, 50x gains, thinking that suddenly there would be a financial revolution here again, backed by one coin, for example. But in fact, on this pump of shit coins, you could say a very narrow group of people made money. And that capital, which was supposed to work later, I think those retail investors who were supposed to enter the market and grab something for themselves, that 1x, 2x, well, they jumped on that, the Solana craze, and a lot of retail money went into the pockets of a limited number of people. I think that had a big impact because it was the beginning of 2025, I remember.
But you could say that the same thing was happening in 2016 to 2017 during the ICO era. No, it was the same thing there too. Did that stop Bitcoin's growth?
Back then, adoption was much smaller. Far fewer people agreed
to it. I agree, but back then Bitcoin cost...
Are we looking at 17 minutes until 10 o'clock? Or is the time actually something below that mark?
1,000, it was even, and so what? And now it costs 64. After all, when we met back then, I remember 2017, I think those were the first meetups in Warsaw. Talking about Bitcoin costing $20,000 was, you were almost like that.
The total number of items we have is exactly 17.
Yeah.
Pay attention to this, because the end of 2017 was that $20,000, where a week earlier, who remembers how much Bitcoin cost? We'll ask our people here. When Bitcoin cost $20,000, how much did it cost a week earlier? Do you remember? 10,000? Suddenly it turned out that within
a week
or 10 days, it actually doubled its value.
That's when I got into Bitcoin.
That's exactly when I got in, and it dropped to 3.5. That
is exactly it. That's how my adventure began.
I was so sad that I got in at 10, but now I'm no longer
sad. If you didn't sell, then sure. How will the crypto world change over the next 100 weeks? Now, I will put forward a few theses, or actually one. I want you to criticize it and also to add your own thoughts in general. Won't we be witnessing a great, powerful fork within these next 100 weeks? Which will look like this. Bitcoin, stablecoins, and RWA will be taken over by large institutions, by banks, by a few exchanges that have MiCA licenses and so on. But generally, that it will be shifted into the world of institutions, large organizations, and so on and so forth, while the rest, meme coins, other cryptocurrencies, some NFTs, all those silly things that we are very often accused of, will actually remain in the hands of crypto enthusiasts. And in this way, this world of crypto degenerates, but in the positive sense of the word, will be marginalized. Then isn't that happening? I will add that we know, maybe you don't know yet, dear viewers, but you probably do know that a new type of sanctions has just come into effect, which forbids touching, for example, an exchange like HTX, which was once a symbol of the cryptocurrency world. I think the problem with Bitcoin is
Because large institutions, large corporations have an appetite for Bitcoin, and as we know, what drives Bitcoin, or rather the Bitcoin protocol, the majority. The more institutions that take control over mining fields, for example, or the more Bitcoin they hold, the more nodes will be in the possession of these institutions, the more they will push for protocol changes that are more favorable to institutions rather than individual users. And here I think is a threat, and I won't recall the statistics off the top of my head right now, but large mining farms, large exchanges, that's already the majority of Bitcoin being controlled by BlackRock. I think they have shares in 4 out of the 5 largest mining farms in the world. BlackRock even added a disclaimer some time ago. Do you remember that disclaimer? That there are 21 million Bitcoins, but it might change in the future. I don't know if that's not a prophecy. I hope not.
But even if they were to change that amount of Bitcoin by taking over that mining pool, the question is whether that positive part of those degenerates that Sławek talks about will say no. And we are the minority, but we are sticking to what was. And now, even if this new version of Bitcoin were to be fully implemented across all those major financial institutions, consider the reality. They would inevitably introduce inflation and a whole host of other problematic factors that would ultimately transform Bitcoin into something that is simply no longer Bitcoin at all. Will the people who use and believe in Bitcoin continue to go to the so-called underground and maintain this network, developing it on the side, and won't it flourish anew?
Maybe so, but I will also say that this process will certainly be connected with the fact that the price of this true degenerate Bitcoin will certainly just go.
You don't know that.
Yes.
I would assume so. Just take a look at this. How many things it takes for a person to go out into the street? And I'm not saying that people will go out into the street if they take away their Bitcoin. Nothing of this sort. However, if a lot of people own Bitcoin and see that suddenly they just want to take it away from them, the question is how many of those people from whom it's being taken will agree to it and will keep agreeing to it. The question is, where is the pain threshold?
Revolution.
Revolution.
Revolution is brewing. Very fair, right? Because there has to be a purge and a replacement of elites every once in a while. Someone said that, I can't recall who again, but the fact is that from our perspective, we think about these regulations, about all these matters, but we are not the center of the world. We are not the center of the world. We are not even a significant part of it. I'm speaking here as us, as Europeans, and furthermore, it must be said that the dynamic is such that Europe's significance is simply dropping dramatically. It's falling, and I don't know if anyone in the world cares about Europe. Maybe it is still out of habit or perhaps out of a deep-seated sense of, well, maybe I don't want to call it duty because that is simply how it usually was back then. It is that lingering ghostly effect of those former colonial countries where the colonizers have long since been gone, yet when a white person arrives, everyone still treats them with a strange, ingrained respect, simply because that is how it used to be for so many generations. Now, I do think that is already slowly changing, and it is very rarely visible these days, but sometimes you can still feel that old heavy respect, or, on the contrary, a sharp, sudden hostility. We as Europeans have probably already lost this race. We won't matter in 20 to 30 years. Maybe this will be some kind of open-air museum. Maybe it will be a quite comfortable and warm place to live, but it won't be something that dictates how the world develops and in what direction it goes. This dictate is currently coming or originating from America on one side, though it's possible, as some say, that these are just its last gasps, and from Asia on the other. We might often find ourselves wondering what path would truly be better for us, especially since we feel much closer to American culture than to Asian culture. However, it is very possible, and perhaps even likely, that in just 2 years, the Taiwan we know today will no longer be the same Taiwan we recognize. In 2 years, it may turn out that crypto in Europe has declined, or it may even turn out that those exchanges that have become large financial institutions, those 10 or so exchanges that have received licenses approval, will be building a new reality, because the fact that there will be a revolution, I think, is inevitable. The question is whether it will happen within the next 2 years, 2 months, or 20 years, but it will definitely happen. Of that we can be sure.
All right, my dear friends, I'm looking at the clock and it looks like we've managed to record an almost hour-long episode. We are missing to the hour, 5.
minutes.
Exactly. We are missing the most important element. The more
Colorful part.
That's right. So authentic facts, facts not myths, and whatever else we call it. So Tomek, I see you like to start from the left, so let's start from the right.
Always remember to keep this in mind.
That for those watching us, you are sitting on the right. Well,
And now, if you will allow me, I'm going to share with you a truly fascinating and completely authentic fact about sharks that I think you'll find quite surprising. It's something that most people simply don't know.
Listen to me.
Sharks have been in the world for 450 million years. To put that into perspective, they have been on Earth longer than trees. They have survived 5 mass global extinctions. They survived 96% of marine animals that lived in the oceans. They lived at a time when Pangaea was still a connected continent on Earth. So that gives perspective and shows how old these organisms are that have endured until now.
And what is it for Bitcoin on Earth?
I'll wait. I think that sooner than in 400 million years we'll reach those 100 million, but we'll see. Just a fun fact of mine.
Łukasz?
Well, I have one. The program is scheduled to be broadcast this coming Saturday, which happens to be August 15th. And I must say, I am genuinely curious if anyone out there in our audience happens to know exactly what special anniversary we are celebrating on that particular day. It is quite a significant date, and I would love to hear your thoughts. I don't mean the Vistula quote, yes, because I'm talking about a crypto anniversary there. Does anyone know? August 15th, 2010.
Unfortunately, as it turns out, things did not go exactly as we had planned.
That is the moment when Bitcoin stopped working and 92 billion Bitcoins were created. Yes, that's not talked about. Just a fun fact. On August 15th, a transaction occurred that exploited a vulnerability discovered on August 6th, and this vulnerability allowed for the creation of Bitcoin during the transaction. Specifically, it was a transaction transferring half a Bitcoin, during which over 92 billion Bitcoins were actually created in the outputs, so a bit more than there will ever be in total. Just a little fun fact, the bug was patched and the transaction was reversed. Such a situation happened. Whoever doesn't believe it, let them check. On August 15th, was there actually a rollback, or was the transaction cancelled because it was actually
Approved in the next block?
It had to
Be rolled back? It had to be rolled back.
check it out, see for yourselves. I won't reveal
Everything. The whole paradigm.
the Bitcoin monument just collapsed at this very moment.
Well, but how efficiently? How will you check that? Exactly. If it was rolled back, then it's gone. And now every AI will tell you that it happened. You'll go on the internet and they'll tell you that it was so. But was it so?
You can confirm it, yes? I mean,
Satoshi could confirm it.
can you confirm that?
Well, and we're at a dead end. He simply
Replaced it with a Bitcoin fork where blocks were rolled back. Yes, and
You can say that. I am surprised.
I am
Very surprised. I can't say that my whole childhood has collapsed.
but
I personally would not.
I really don't wash my hands anymore. Hence the asterisk.
I really want to.
I want to share my own interesting fact. I think it was mentioned before, but not with its full implications. How many hearts does an octopus have?
The number 83.
How?
Did you know?
Because there was a fun fact like that.
However, on the other hand, it is important to note that there certainly wasn't a follow-up to it. Namely, that one of these hearts stops working when the octopus swims. That's why octopuses prefer to walk on the bottom. Because when they start to swim, it's a significantly greater effort for them because one heart doesn't pump something or other.
Interesting.
Ink-colored blood.
I've actually seen octopuses walking more than swimming.
Yes, and I would like to end with this interesting fact. In the solar system, the only planet that rotates differently than the others is Venus. And may our Bitcoin be like that Venus. May it push forward relentlessly against everyone who stands in its way and simply exist unbothered and free. Let it exist with purpose, completely ignoring all the rigid institutions and societal expectations that try to define its path, choosing instead to forge its own way forward.
Bravo. My dear friends, that's all for today. Thanks for tuning in.
Wait, no, that's it, right? Wait, because we have a surprise now.
Wait, let's do some breaking news, okay?
Surprise first. We invite the surprise here.
And then there was the big surprise.
Well, gentlemen, come on in. You can open it.
It will, in fact, be the most significant change we have seen in this entire project, and it is going to happen much sooner than anyone expected.
Blow up in their faces. No,
Works.
we'll just have to wait and see if anything interesting pops out for us in a moment or two. It's really just a matter of being patient. Whoa, I honestly cannot believe what I am seeing right now.
Pull it out. We got it? Bravo. Congratulations. Congratulations.
Congratulations, gentlemen. We
Got it.
All right, let it be. We'll record the breaking news later. So all the best. We're waiting for comments and more subscriptions. As you can see, they didn't go to waste.
Thanks.
Take
Here, bye.
Well, look at that. And such a cure. I thought it would be a joy.